Please hold whilst we connect you to Redacted.
This is Oliver Alexander.
And this is Fraser Greenfield.
And this is Tom Skeehan, and you're listening to
Redacted.
Based in Australia's lost city of Canberra, Tom Skeehan has been running his studio since 2011 and has been making waves on Australia's east coast ever since, with furniture collections for brands like Stylecraft and Instyle, while also establishing themselves with the award-winning special designs like the new retail front for the Canberra Glassworks. Welcome to the show, Tom.
Thanks, Fraser.
Could you just fill us in? Who is Tom Skeehan in 100 words or less?
In 100 words or less, wow. Look, I'm a designer. I think that's the best way that I can introduce myself these days. I've got a wonderful foundation in furniture design, from making early on in my career through to then studying industrial design and then ultimately building a company around furniture design. However, in the last sort of 5 years, I've really tried to grow the studio and then transition into solving other problems and working into other areas of the A&D sector.
So if we loop back a bit to the early days, how did you first discover design or product design?
It took me a little while to discover industrial design formally. Like I was saying earlier, I have this sort of beautiful connection to furniture through my dad. He was a carpenter, and my mum was very craft-focused and a creative. And I loved illustration. I loved making, and I think that was just my calling. However, where I grew up, and I guess where we were positioned in Australia, I didn't really see university as a pathway for me. I didn't understand it. I didn't think I could afford it. And so I was pretty much destined to become a plumber. And that was cool. I was excited about that, and that's where I was headed. But then I got an opportunity to go and to talk to some people at a TAFE college here in Canberra around the end of school. They just showed me a pathway into some other career opportunities. And at the time, it was just defined as art and design, and it was a pathway through to art school. And I was terrified of being an artist. I felt like I needed a trade, and I had to show that I was doing something with my career. But these people gave me the courage to apply, and really the application process was just saying, hey, I want to do this course. It was a 6-month short course. But as soon as I entered into that and I decided to do it, it really opened up this path for me, I think, to become a professional creative in some capacity. And it's where I met my first mentors, and I started to see that there was a career path in this industry as a professional artist, as a graphic designer, even as an architect.
And what did your parents think about you choosing this over a trade?
They were actually really cool with it. I don't know where this pressure came from me to do a trade. It probably just came from my other peers and the other groups of people that at that time, most of them were already working, had that lined up and from their parents, and they had connections. And my dad, he's American, and he came over to Australia and has just been a maker, a carpenter, a furniture maker. And he definitely carved his own path, and he never put any pressure on me to pursue a particular career. And looking back on it now, I think he always wanted me to pursue a creative industry, but he didn't ever want to dictate what I did. I had to find it on my own.
So you eventually went to university after that, after this 6-month course?
It took a few years to get to university. After that 6-month course, I landed an awesome job with a local furniture maker called Craig Harris. And I pretty much did an unofficial apprenticeship with him. I got to work with him for a few years, and he was working on a big body of work for a new collection. He was trying to get products into production. He'd done a master's in fine furniture in Tasmania and was really in that grassroots part of growing a business. I was his first staff member. And through that journey, I was like, okay, this is rad. I really want to do this. However, I could see parts of Craig's business and even the industry and starting to piece together this puzzle around who are these key influencers in our space. And it became pretty clear that even if I became a master craftsman and a maker, kind of needed these other inputs, I think, to become a furniture designer, which ultimately led me to more study, a little bit more education.
Yeah, that would have put you in great stead starting university, have that 2-year background, really practical experience.
Yeah, I try to talk about this a bit to early career designers and talk about being patient and finding your true path. Going into university as a mature age student just allowed me to be hyper focused. Like at that time, most of my friends were buying houses and moving into that next chapter of their life, and I'm going back as a first year student. But very quickly, I'd established myself as already a working professional, and I could focus more on leadership and just fine tuning smaller skills and different skills in that university environment. And I loved it. It was definitely a beautiful moment in my career.
I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if that's a bit of a survivorship bias, because when we had senior age students, we usually just saw them as passing through, because that's generally what happened. They'd stick there for 1 or 2 years. They were trying to recover from a nasty divorce.
Yeah.
Or they realized that doing medicine just wasn't for me. And then, of course, they go back to doing medicine. Was there any secret sauce to keeping laser focused while you're in that senior age student role, or you just knew what you were doing at that time and you were going to follow through with an extended version of what you were already doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was definitely laser focused, and it's because I'd already started to establish my studio. Even working for Craig, he was encouraging me to enter into exhibitions and start a personal brand. And at the time, I think it was called T3 Design was the first business that I registered. And then I branded to Tommy.com. And I was just playing. I was just trying to make work and get into exhibitions. And I think that is what allowed me to focus at university. Every CAD file, everything that I would do, I'd try and have a lens of it back into how can this allow me to level up as a furniture designer.
So you started your own business before you graduated then?
Yeah, that's right. Actually, some of my early products, because I was a student, I was making them in the university workshop and just telling the TA that it was part of a project, and definitely trying to use all those resources.
Yeah.
And at what point did you become Skeehan Studio?
It was years later. It was on until I felt like I had the courage to use my surname. And I felt like there was a point where I was ready for that. And I was already working in industry. So maybe to jump around a bit, after university, although I had my business, it was still a side hustle. And I actually went and worked for a few consultancies in Australia, mainly in Sydney. But the big tipping point was when I got offered a job at Breville and was asked to come and join their team. And at the time, that's a really big deal. They weren't hiring many kind of grad designers. And I had a friend of mine who was quite senior there, or let's say a mentor, someone I met through university. And it was a really amazing path, I think, to become a designer at Breville and open up a lot of opportunities. And I turned it down because I felt like I was at a tipping point with my studio and I wanted to see where that would go. And I felt like there's a path for me at Breville if I want it, but let's go 2 years on my studio. And that's when I rebranded it to Skeehan and said, okay, let's try and take this seriously.
Wow. What did those early foundational years look like? Did you have a game plan, or what was your markers of early success that gave you the confidence to strike it on your own?
Yeah, there wasn't much of a game plan. It was just about creating work. I think without realizing I was more interested in building a brand rather than making money. So I was just creating work for exhibitions. I was helping out local businesses. I built a really beautiful local community here in Canberra of small businesses that were also like-minded and really hungry. And I got to work with them quite closely on small projects. So it was definitely not about building this mega studio that I'm trying to establish now.
When you say you had some early businesses that you worked with, was this an early process of cold calling people and saying, hey, can I design some furniture for you? Or, what were those early contacts like?
Yeah, my first breakthrough locally, I guess my first client that was notable was for a local cafe here in Canberra called Lonsdale Street Roasters. And at that time, the coffee scene was just coming up in Canberra. We're definitely on the back of the wave at that time in some of those sectors. And there was this really amazing coffee roastery on the main street of Lonsdale Street in Braddon. But they were a startup and they were roasting coffee. It was the first roastery in Canberra. And they had all these people spilling out onto the street in milk crates, sitting there having piccolos for the first time. And the seating and the whole environment had a lot of pace to it and was really gritty and raw, and that's what made it exciting. But the seating situation, I think, could have been improved. And so I went out and designed these slip-over trays, a tray that goes over the milk crate that you could carry the drinks around in. and you could then slide it over the milk crate and sit down so you didn't get those marks on your butt when you sit there for half an hour.
Yeah, but that's how you know you've been on smoker.
Yeah, oh, totally. That's it. Oh, that's a whole nother. We can do a spin-off into my tradie life,
Yeah.
pre-industrial design for sure. But I just made them. I made 20 of them and etched their logo into the top and just delivered them one day. At that point, I had no website, no brand, barely a logo, but I felt like there was this connection with this company. These are the cool guys in town. Like, if I can get to know them, they're going to help elevate me, and this is where I want to be. I was already one of their customers. And so I dropped these things off, and then the owner just was stoked, right? He thought it was such a generous thing to do. And for then on, I was a regular and I got looked after, and they were obviously growing. So any new venture, any new business or their network, they started to link me up into paid projects.
And how much did those 20 slide over trays cost?
Oh, it was a massive black hole. It would have been a chunk of change to Bunnings for all the plywood, and then 4 days in the workshop making them. And they were quite primitive. They weren't anything amazing. They were just very functional. And
Yeah.
but it was more of a gift in a way. If you think about it as a marketing exercise, I could have done so many different things to market my business. In this case, it was about gifting something to a business that I've wanted to align myself with.
Is that a strategy that you've repeated and refined since?
Definitely. Yeah, it's a book that I read called Guerrilla Marketing, and I was given it by, again, another cafe owner who was really interested in Seth Godin's work early on before Seth became who he is now. He was just writing into blogs and hadn't published many books. And he was talking about this book, Guerrilla Marketing. And there's a wonderful story in there about a person sending out their portfolio, but a printed portfolio in the mail. But instead of just delivering it directly to that business, they actually redirected it through a few other countries first. So when it landed back to that creative director's table, it was all beat up and had these stamps on it, and it was a really curious document. And the strategy behind that was this person's going to open this just out of curiosity, and it's that cut through and creative thinking that doesn't cost very much that really landed with me. And I'm like, well, I can do something like that.
Yeah, that's a different way of thinking about it.
It's quite a deviation from the old days of just walk into their office, sit down in the lobby and demand an interview.
Totally. And I think because I'm in Canberra, this is something I'm only reflecting on now later in my career. I had to do those things because I wasn't in London or even in Sydney. And I didn't have much of a network into the architecture and design sector, let alone furniture brands like Moroso or, Karamoku in Japan. These are all the companies that I'd love to work for. And so I needed to think of other ways to connect with them on a shoestring budget.
That moment, like when you landed your first big client?
The next breakthrough would have been getting Stylecraft here in Australia and partnering with them with my first collection called Hoshi. That was an amazing kind of feeling. That's when I felt like, okay, I've got the foundations here to build something. At that time, Ross Gardam was a mentor of mine, and Alexander Lottestein. Both of those guys have run amazing design studios here in Australia. And I'd seen them in magazines. I'd been to product launches. I knew of them. And I was lucky enough to get introduced to Alex at an event, and he was represented by Stylecraft at the time. And he just really put a fire underneath me and said, it's not that hard. There's a few key people you need to get to know. Mm-hmm. If you want, I can introduce you, but I think it's best if you just find your own path and
You're
start.
Going to introduce
Yeah, no, that's right. He would have, I think. He definitely would have.
Yeah.
But he said, just start small, and it's about this icebreaker and word of mouth. And so I went and pitched them this rubbish cafe stool, of course, because I'm just this cafe stool guy. It was a full aluminium flat pack cafe stool, and I got an invitation to go to Sydney and present it to their brand manager, and it totally tanked. They didn't need it. It was too expensive. There was no real sector for it. It was a cool looking product, but not right for Stylecraft. Mm-hmm. I actually did that 3 years in a row. I went back, presented another chair, a low chair, again, too expensive, didn't have arms on it, used too much fabric. But each time they would give me a little bit more of a brief, and I could tell now, looking back on it, that they were totally vetting me, seeing if I'm actually committed to being in this industry before they go and take me on into their brand.
Yeah.
And so I'd get rejected, I'd go back, and I'd spend another 6 months or 12 months working on a new prototype.
What would you say changed in your methodology in between these different interviews, if you will, that helped you get better?
Designing for the market and not for myself. It took a big shift to not be creating furniture that I loved, that I thought was beautiful or desirable or whatever it was that I was interested in my own personal aesthetic. I started to create design briefs and work backwards from what is there an appetite for in what this particular sector? Who is my customer? What's my price point? And then that gave me some parameters to work in, which was actually really freeing because then I could hyper focus.
And what was happening around that time around other projects? Were there other projects complementing that process?
At that time, I was still doing night shifts powder coating at a factory here in Canberra. I was doing anything to fund these projects. There was no real revenue. I started a hot dog cart for a little while with a friend of mine who was an artist, and we also had a gallery together. We tried to run exhibitions and sell commissioned work. I was really just exploring all these different territories in the creative field. The main pillar would have been a furniture design studio, but I needed revenue. I needed some cash.
Well, very entrepreneurial of you.
Was there anything special about these hot dogs?
Yeah, not really. It was maybe. They were very expensive to make and we didn't sell them for enough. Learn a lot about margins. They were an Australian hot dog. We found a really great local butcher, a local bakery and a local relish. So all three of those came together to create what was called the Bing Bang Banger. And we parked up on Lonsdale Street, again, outside the front of one of these cafes that I was designing some furniture for. And on the weekends, we'd sell hot dogs. And we might make $1,000 over the weekend, and then it would be spent by Tuesday on sausages, for the next week.
Is it possible for us to get the recipe and try out these Bing Bang Bangers?
Absolutely. I'm sure there's an Instagram account somewhere buried there on the internet that's got it all on it.
If you've had a Bing Bang Banger, please do get in contact with us because we'd love to know how they tasted.
Yeah, we had a pretty good core follow. We had a good tribe there. I think it could have.
That's great.
When you look back at these early days, what do you reckon you could have done better in those initial phases of your business?
I think I could have networked better and maybe more strategically. I think I've built a really beautiful community in our industry and I've got lots of friends and colleagues and people I can call and to work with and to bounce ideas off and to essentially be mentored by. But I'm learning now later on that so much of this industry is on that word of mouth marketing and those little moments that can really leapfrog or 10x a particular moment in your career. And I had the chance to meet some pretty amazing people throughout my career and have traveled a lot for my work. And I just think that in those moments, let's say if I was at New York for ICFF launching my own chair that I'd funded to get there, I think I could have maybe been a little bit more strategic about those environments and put a bit of a sales hat on and gone out there and tried to have some of those awkward conversations with other really influential people.
And what do you reckon you excelled at in those early days?
I think I was quite prolific at making work and very good at making it just good enough, just enough to get it up and out. And again, back to being influenced by Seth Godin's work and thinking about him as a marketing guru, he would talk about creatives that they ship work. And that really landed with me. And there's no point spending 12 months on a chair and not shipping it or shipping it and it not land. How can I get this out in 3 months as an idea, see if it sticks, and then go again? And so I was really active, I think, in creating a portfolio of work and shipping.
Because I got some bad news for you.
Please.
Guerrilla marketing wasn't written by Seth Godin. It was written by Jay Levinson.
That's right. No, sorry, I didn't clarify that. Yeah. So Jay wrote it, and then that's the Bible that has inspired a lot of Seth's work. And then now Chris Doe, who I guess would be our modern marketing guy, Seth's inspired him. But it seems like the guerrilla marketing book, and there's some really weird concepts in there. You can tell that it's written pre-internet, and pretty interesting.
I'll be reading it. I've already ordered my copy as we speak.
What is the Skeehan design process and why do you do it this way?
As the studio's grown, the process has become a little bit more refined and structured. And that's because we need to communicate this to bigger clients and show them each of the phases and apply billing to that and give updates on our timeline. And it's broken down to a pretty normal, I think, design process, studio process, with your discovery, define, design and develop. There are key blocks. But inside that, I think there is a little bit of a unique methodology. Coming from a making background, I love the prototyping process. I really like getting hands-on. And with my new interests in this sort of experiential design and lighting and design thinking, trying to plug in different things into our workshops with our clients, where we might do a design thinking exercise called the Crazy Eights, and it's something that's normally applied to this sector of design, but we're using it to work on a circulation map for a new school. I think that's fun.
Do you do any work with color, material, and finish?
Yeah, look, that's a nice question, because if you think of Benjamin Hubert, I know he's been a guest on here, and he had that mantra in the beginning of material-driven, process-led. And I stole that for years. I still use it as a way to introduce my business. And so much of the materiality informs my product, and the experimentation. As an Australian designer working inside this country, manufacturing a lot of products here, you really need to understand your materials and leverage those relationships with manufacturers so that you can discover new opportunities.
Yeah, to innovate through that, because it's a smaller scale here in Australia. Is that what you mean?
Totally. That's your hook.
Yeah.
I think that's where you can flex. You may not be able to steam bend the same way that you can if we're producing products in a different country. So how can we explore other materials to create a form that's similar to that?
Do you have any examples that you can talk about?
There was a chair, a Hoshi chair that I did with Stylecraft. Originally, that was a steam bent back rail, but I couldn't find anyone in Australia to do that. So again, worked really closely with Evo Style in Sydney to engineer a corner rail that was CNC'd out of a board, and then found some really interesting hardware out of Germany that was not really available in this country, and started importing that to connect the joints, and made this really strong back rail in not a traditional way, not the way that you would probably approach it if you had a bigger factory. And that's then been applied to a lot of other products in that range, because it becomes very economical and we're not wasting much material.
That's very interesting. I'd love to see some photos. That we'll link them in the show notes if there's.
Yeah, I can share that.
Yeah, it's interesting how you mentioned bringing things in from different industries, because I think that can be really valuable too. The thinking of another method from somewhere completely different can really get people thinking in a different way in the design concept development stage.
Totally. That's why I'm so interested in growing Skeehan to not just be a furniture studio, and allowing it to touch into so many other areas of the A&D sector. Because I think there is a framework and a methodology that we can apply to so many different things. And I'm a curious person. I like exploring different industries and more importantly, just collaborating. I don't have to be the specialist myself, but I want to be surrounded by other specialists. And I love being in a room where I don't really understand what's going on. And I'm doing some big projects at the moment with some architects, and some in Australia, some overseas. And I'm just been bolted in as a small part of this team. And it's amazing the conversations that we're having collectively.
So you like being lost at sea?
It's great. It's a great way to level up. It's a really powerful way to push yourself to become equal to these conversations. And
that's really interesting, because it must be really cool to be involved, because are there sort of larger scale projects with the architects, and you're in the detail design?
Yeah, sometimes we get brought in high level just to even just creative leadership and just supporting some design thinking exercises and be there as a soundboard. Yeah. Some of even early on in my career, I had carved a bit of a niche in the consultancy space, just being a communicator, where we'd be there with the brand manager, the engineer, the CEO, another two designers, but I'm mapping out their notes visually. We're sketching it on the whiteboard, and I'm listening to all 4 or 5 of these people and trying to connect them all. And so I do a little bit of that in, let's say, that thought leadership or that space.
Yeah.
But then on the granular level, we're coming in and we're doing the product design or the detail.
And it's an interesting concept, being the oil between the gears of these different departments.
I do think of my studio as that. We are the in-between, and I love that. I don't know how to charge for that yet. That's the next challenge.
$1 million.
But it's definitely our superpower.
That's great.
Because I can definitely empathize as well during this limitations of manufacturing-led design, because coming from mostly a large manufacturing background where we would pick how we're going to make the product before we even decide what it looks like. How did you come up with this methodology? How did you come up with the Skeehan way of doing things?
I think it was born out of a bit of grassroots and self-funding. So I had to find some hacks and some ways to do it myself. Even working with Stylecraft, although that was a big breakthrough in my career, the arrangement with them is wholesale. they actually wanted me to supply the product. So they accepted the design and they wanted the product, but they wanted me to control the manufacturing. And so I very quickly had to build a manufacturing arm to my design studio. And if you look at my revenue these days, I'm actually still making 60% or more of our revenue from self-manufactured products that we sell wholesale to a few different brands. And that's another beast in itself. I've got warehouses, forklift, operations, production managers, all that sort of stuff that is very different to a design consultancy kind of hat.
Yeah, for sure. Wow.
So at your business, is it less than 40% of its revenue on services and the rest is you're running almost like a traditional retail or hardware shipping business?
That's right, yeah. And I'm shifting it. I'm trying to shift it because I want to diversify and get a lot lighter. And because the first formative years in my career were products that were on wholesale agreements, and we're doing a lot of that. And all of my other design service work, there were just smaller fees. And it's only now that the royalties are starting to kick in a little bit and products are starting to sell, and a lot of them don't perform as well as you may think. And you're also then trying to learn about how to charge for these service kind of packages. And so you're building two businesses at one time. And again, through this experience, just through learning that I need to approach it that way and I need to think of them each as individual pillars.
I don't know. It sounds like it's a much safer model to have your own product line internally. I've definitely worked at some consultancies where they don't have any internal products, and it makes it very swingy for them come into financial year, where suddenly you have a 20-man studio that's going down to 15 or 10 because they just didn't win those contracts, or the client has said they're reducing it.
Yeah, I get that. It's something that's a lesson I'm learning in the slower pace of manufacturing your own product. But you look at risk differently as well. I feel like if I'm producing my own product that I'm funding, I'm definitely looking through a lens of how much is this going to cost and where are our risks. Whereas some of the briefs that I'm getting from these international brands now, they've got such an amazing capacity for manufacturing with big capital and a bigger timeline that I have to think differently about the way that we can approach, a product. And I find that really exciting because I don't have the same limitations.
I like that studio one about what you mentioned, Fraser, about having those swings with if you don't have the consistent stream of work. It can be a real challenge, right?
Oh, it's definitely something that kills studio growth.
Yeah.
Skeehan, have you heard of many businesses in Australia that operate as partnerships where you have a senior designer gets kept on through salary sacrificing and they buy a piece of the business?
I'm hearing a little bit of it now through a few brands where, they're offering those sort of packages, and I'm interested in that as well. But I don't think it's as common. Actually, maybe you can tell me more. That was an interesting question. Do you think there is?
In Australia, it's almost unheard of.
Okay, cool.
I've been in the States and the UK, it's relatively common. And a lot of the big design firms that we all know, like Frog, IDEO, that's how they got big.
Cool.
Is you keep the good talent as senior designers who are partners, and you really keep the talent who can bring on clients by motivating them by working like Suits, a law firm.
And same as the big architecture firms. Yeah, spot on.
And I do certainly feel that it is a missed opportunity to not operate that way, because it gives your business a lot of staying power, and it also gives you a reason to keep talent, and it motivates people to work a bit harder if you want to rub your fingers and get all nefarious and twirl your mustache.
Oh, totally. It's my biggest challenge at the moment is building teams and shifting into being a designer, but ultimately running a company where I need to build great teams, different people. And how do I motivate them? And often it's not by salary. I need to motivate them in other ways for career growth and a certain lifestyle.
You're not going to motivate many people by salary these days.
No, but partnerships is great. And I think that's a wonderful pathway for Skiing Studio. And I see that definitely being an opportunity.
Yeah, it's much more motivating. How does colour, material and finish factor into your work, especially with Australian sourced materials? And what is your process for implementing, iterating and innovating with it?
Colour's awesome, and it's definitely an area that I'm very interested in growing and getting better at. And it's probably one of the weaker links in my creative process or ability. And it's just one of those areas that I want to get really good at as a studio. And if you look at across a lot of our products in the last few years, we've done a lot of color, and I'm really proud of that. However, is it particularly strategic, or are we just trying and experimenting? And so the next step now for me is to start to understand that a little bit more. I'm doing a really interesting project at the moment for an experience space for a consulting company and the education sort of sector. And essentially, the room needs to change through phases. It needs to go through different zones for different workshop environments. So the materials that we pick and the base palette, and then the lighting design that overlays that to change the colour of that room to then reflect the type of workshop, is the brief. That's the problem we're trying to solve. So what I'm doing is bringing in lighting engineers and colour experts to talk to me about how they control light and how these materials are going to behave, and then balance that with the budget and these other kind of steering groups. And my responsibility is to bring all this together into a solution. It's been awesome because it's so different to applying a material or finish to a piece of furniture, but I can see how this is all going to trickle down and make me a better designer on that macro level.
Yeah. Are there any influences or studios that you'd like to reach the standard of and perhaps surpass one day?
A really good question. We've definitely got the pin-ups like in our industry. As I'm starting to peel back the layers on these studios and either meet the directors directly or be part of projects, I'm discovering how diverse their businesses are and how there's so much revenue that is not seen. And there's a big foundation of work underneath there from what they actually show. But Snowheader, I think, is doing some amazing things in architecture and in product, as well as sort of some of the other product-specific brands, even like Hay. I think they're, again, a really interesting brand.
And would you say that there's some characters at maybe Snowheader that you'd label as role models?
Yeah, I think they prioritize community and sustainability, and it seems like they're great at building teams globally and not afraid to tackle big problems. I've known them as an architecture firm for my whole career, but John Goulder, again, a friend and mentor of mine, is plugged into their team, as a celebrated Australian furniture designer. And they see value in investing in someone like him as part of their team. And so what I love is that there's a culture, or at least a company structure there, that allows these people to be part of that community.
And do you ever wonder if a lot of these larger firms or more successful firms, they get there by having an appetite for risk and a strategy for managing it?
I think so. I've been bidding on a few bigger projects on my own and part of teams lately, and I've lost quite a lot because it's just a process of learning how to submit this kind of documentation. And a big part of this process is managing risk and communicating that to those stakeholders. And so I think they do get very good at managing risk, and also not as precious about the projects and charging what it's worth, or getting to a point in a fee structure where it's an addition, and having a really robust contract.
And how would you say, considering that you spent not an insane amount of money a long time ago on covers for milk crates, how would you say you've changed over time when it comes to managing and strategizing around risk?
Trying to share the process really helps. So talking to other people. I have a business coach now. Before my business coach, I had an accountant. And before my accountant, I just had someone who knew how to use Excel. But each time I would ask these people for particular advice in that moment. And I think sharing that risk with somebody, even just as a conversation, or paying them to help you with it, has been a big shift. Investing into that as part of the way that I grow.
So to summarize, would you say acknowledging where you don't have the best skills and finding and seeking people out who do?
Spot on, Fraser. I think that's the golden ticket.
That's the secret sauce. Acknowledging that no one is the suppository of all wisdom.
Yeah. Sometimes as a business, you're occasionally obligated to take chaff work. It pays the bills, but maybe not as high value, and often leads to more of the same. For example, there's a story of a business that takes on point of sale work, retail, only to find 3 years later that's all they do. They've won lots of jobs in it. How do you guys navigate that kind of issue?
Firstly, I love that you're using the word chaff. I think it's great, and it'll definitely stick. And as soon as I heard it, I was like, that's perfect. I get it.
Yeah.
It's a balance. And like I said, a big part of the work you'll see on our website or social media, there's a lot of actually revenue underneath there that we get that we don't particularly share. And it's not that strategic. It's just that sometimes the projects just aren't documented that well, or they just don't align with some of the better projects that I want to be promoting. And it is a fine line between doing a good project and helping someone solve their problem, but they're not getting distracted from what your mission is and what you really want to be doing. Especially through the pandemic, when you feel like you might be backed into a bit of a corner, or there's a lot of pressure to pivot and diversify your revenue, I was really exploring any opportunity for us to convert some sales and get some cash flow. And I realized that so much of my revenue was tied to key manufacturers and a few brands. And if they go under or don't prioritize me, then it trickles down. But also I do worry about spreading too thin and not becoming a specialist and really good in a certain area. However, I hope, and maybe by all means jump in if I'm just rambling now, but I think there is a way to still find that, let's say that chaff work or those projects that have some good revenue attached to them and easy for you to deliver, but keep tweaking it through that lens of how do I find my next customer that I can do this same kind of work, but it's a little bit more meaningful, or there's a kind of a 10x opportunity there.
Yeah. Yeah, so you can build on that, but you've got to allow the time to do that and always have that vision of doing something that aligns with those values and your goals to what you want to become.
Yeah, that's a nice way to look at it. And maybe just by talking through it now, it starts to sink in a little bit more. There's always got to be something in a project that we can lever for something else. So what I mean by that is that even if it is, let's say, chaff work, we have to be leveling up some other skills in a significant way to justify doing that. And we actually do quite a lot of digital rendering for other studios and other businesses. And I don't promote that at all. It's just, again, people just know that we can do it. And so a brand will come to us and go, okay, can you render this package for this product or for this environment or building? Even property developers, branding agencies will do work for them. That can be a massive derail to the studio, the culture, even the time that you're spending on other projects. But it is profitable work and we're quite good at it. The challenge now is to go, do I wind that up into becoming a new company and something that we will do and actively promote? Or do I just let that pass and go, cool, we did that for a minute, it served its purpose, I now need to refocus over here?
Yeah. Or do you set a time limit of we only allocate, let's say, 20 hours to 3D rendering?
I try to. I don't think I'm that smart. And this is that next chapter, I think, for me, is learning about business and becoming a better leader, is figuring out all of these pillars and which ones of them are valuable or profitable.
All right, maybe give me a call if you need to do that.
Perfect.
Because, unfortunately, I live in Excel. If I could design in Excel, I would do it.
Yeah, you love rendering, though. I know.
I have mixed feelings about rendering.
Compared to Excel.
Oh, me too. Yeah.
What are you? You're growing to like it.
My only true love is Google Sheets.
That's awesome.
But no, it is definitely something that I've had to challenge with that running my own business for 2 years, where 1 week I'm doing 20 hours and the next I'm doing 60. And those 60-hour weeks, I was not getting ahead. I was just banking a check. And I definitely had to sit back and look at what I was doing and make sure that I knew when to say no. And the easy way for me to do that was when I looked at a job and said, it's going to take me, if I limit X amount of hours, then the deadline is this far in the future, 2 months or whatever. And if they were not happy with that, I wouldn't take the job.
That's a nice lesson to learn. I think there's a thread there with a lot of successful business owners in any sector are good at saying no and taking that measured risk and going, okay, look, that's an awesome opportunity, but that's not our path. I'm going to turn that down because it's going to allow me to give my energy to the areas that, more in line with my true skill set and where I want to take it.
I mean, I would say, having worked in big business with lots of clients small and large, there are a lot of successful businesses and a lot of successful business owners who don't know why they are successful.
Yeah, fair.
And that is arguably, to me, much more scary because a lot of them hit this cap, this glass ceiling, so to speak, where they don't know what to do to get bigger or to be more profitable or to increase the safety of their business because they don't know why they are successful. They just put numbers in and numbers come out and it works, and there's this black box where something happens and the money gets printed out.
Wow.
And that to me is terrifying.
Yeah, I have to. I'm just too much of a control freak, I think. And although I clearly am, I feel like I'm only halfway through this journey, and I've got so much to learn. And it's amazing. Even now, I'll discover something even in the last 2 weeks, and I go, I wish I knew that 3 years ago. Or how did I not understand that? I thought I was really across this, and you just don't know what you don't know. Yeah, and that's the beautiful part about growing a business and being a designer. Is that in 5 years from now, I'm going to be a completely different person, a different creative. I'm going to have new skill sets and approach business differently.
And when we talk about different approaches to businesses and moving out of different work types, you mentioned that you sell, if that's the right phrase, design thinking services and workshops. How did you get into that? What was the rationale? And is it something you want to keep pursuing?
Yeah, I'm definitely interested in keeping on pursuing it, but finding a very narrow lens in the area that I would do it in. And because I've tried it now for a little while, I've been involved in some projects or working with some particular sectors that maybe just personally I didn't quite connect to, and I found it much more challenging. Mm-hmm. How I got into it was, again, reflecting on my own skills and wanting to level up, and how do I get paid to think and not paid to make? And shifting a bit away from manufacturing products and having that as a primary pillar, but getting paid to think and solve problems. And I knew in time I would be able to build more royalty contracts and relationships with brands, but on a local level, could I help people with strategy? And I do a bit with branding agencies, supporting them with different projects, and I've also had my brand done here in Canberra. And a big breakthrough, I think, for them as they were growing was starting to sell to their clients strategy. Quite often they would just do that part of the process to get a good result for the client, and they would package it up in one fee that would be part of the design fee. Once they started to slice that and segment that off and just sell strategy, it allowed them to get really good at that. And there was revenue there. And I thought, I'm doing the same thing for product. So once I started building out a work package for strategy, it allowed me to go, okay, I'm doing design thinking exercises as a part of this strategy work. Let's go and talk to some of these other consultants in Australia and even universities and see if I can pitch to them my services. It was just an experiment.
And an experiment that paid dividends.
I think it could, definitely. And it's shifted the way that I even recruit my team and the people that I've got in the company. And I also like talking to these people about some of their problems because they're so different to some of the solutions that I'm solving in the product space.
How's it changed how you recruit new team members?
Because I'm looking for people that are very curious and self-directed learners. Mm-hmm. I think before I was going for more of a silo specialist in an area, which I still need. I definitely need people to plug into a role and be really good at that thing. But starting to interview and ask different questions around how you've overcome other challenges, in your life, even if it's learning an instrument particular to you, you've shown me that you have a way of thinking and a methodology, and that you are able to take a problem and figure it out your own path, rather than rely on me to spell it out and to show you how it's done.
Do you have any special interview questions then to figure out if they are purposeful thinkers?
No, I just totally stumble through it. And I do get to the end of an interview and go, there were some really good questions, and I always forget to write them down.
All right. Do you want a free one?
Please.
You have to answer it, though.
Okay, let's have it.
What's your spirit animal?
Oh, that's a beautiful question. It would be I want it to be something, a creature that can fly, but I feel like that's the standard on the answer. I want to dig deeper into an elephant. That'd be awesome.
Okay. Because the reason this is a good question is A, it's silly, so it opens people up. B, it's very culturally contextual. And C, it tells you either what the qualities the person aspires to have or believes they have.
That's a really good question.
So you aspire to be wise. Would that be correct?
Yeah, and slow and considered. I think that would be a really nice place to end up in, where it's not as frantic as I feel my life is at the moment.
Yeah. In your experience of aligning with your new values and pillars that you want to drive the business towards in the new themes that you want to aim for, how do you draw in clients that suit and align with your new goals?
Yeah. How do we market to these aspiring companies?
And even how do you figure out that you should or shouldn't be working together during that initial touching base process?
Yeah, that's a great question. The second part, especially because often by the time you get to that first date where you might be talking about working together, it can be very difficult then to back away and go, okay, let's just pause a little bit. To find them, and this is what I'm working on at the moment, especially given it's early part of the year, and road mapping out a bit of a marketing strategy for the year. And I've really shifted, I think, the way that the website's positioned and some of the projects and case studies that we're presenting there. And there's a lot more to come over the next few months as well. And they're all through the lens of those next customers that we may want to connect with. And how I find them, it's a bit of a vision board about these particular brands. I'm definitely looking at competitors or other people in this space that I might aspire to and looking at their client portfolio and be like, oh, wow, they just did this activation with Nike. And then you dig a bit deeper and you're like, oh, they also had the brand contract, or they brought in the product design studio. Vert Design here in Sydney just did this awesome collaboration with IKEA, and looks like it was through another agency that sort of connected the dots there. And so my approach then is to go, okay, who are some of these decision makers? Yes, I can pitch directly to Oakley if I want to work with them, or directly to Qantas. However, are there other people in that chain that are influencing their decision making, and can I connect with them and help them?
Yeah, for sure.
How do you produce an inception moment?
It's all word of mouth marketing now.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to be much more active online and share my thoughts and connect more on LinkedIn and Instagram. But I found the biggest leaps and the connections are when someone else introduces you into that moment, to that person. So finding those facilitators, those people that can be that link, and just becoming their friend, helping them, connecting with them, being really human.
And when you do find those stakeholders, how do you convince them that good design is a value add? And even beyond that, your design is a good value add?
Awesome question. I think you want to show them the gap. So I call it the bridge the gap. And so I try to talk to them about where you are now and where you want to go, your desired reality. And if you can get them talking about their desired reality, where they want to take
hopes and dreams.
That's right. You get them talking about that finish line. And if you can understand that and you go, okay, I can help you get there. I may not be able to solve the whole thing, but I can move that needle for you. I'm going to facilitate this first part, or I'm going to come in at this part. So once I can talk to them openly and they can share their vision, then I can bridge that gap for them. It's much easier then for me to show a tool or a process or a case study where I've done it before, or a methodology, and say, okay, I think through this process, I can help you get there. I can bridge that gap.
In that initial briefing, you've already managed expectations by the way you described that, because that's another challenging thing to portray to a client. They may think you'll be able to solve all those issues, but the way you've described that just even now shows that you're saying, I only fit in this area. So that's a really important thing, to manage those expectations from the start.
That's spot on. And this is about team building and collaboration.
Yeah.
And also repeat business. There's been companies that I've worked with where in the beginning, the first, say, contract I've had, I've only been able to do certain parts of the project. But now as I'm growing, I can say, let me take on the art direction and drive this to market with you. And if I can then package that up and offer it as a service, then I'm feeling, if it's talking about bridging that gap, I'm part of more of that journey.
Yeah. And what have been some of the hard things or issues that have happened around client expectations in your experience?
I think their desired reality and getting a client to trust you and let you do your job and not tell them what to do, but guide them and let them come to that realization where they deeply understand that solution and they trust it. Because if they trust it and believe in it, they're more likely to invest in it properly for the rest of its life, because there's so much of its success is going to come also after we've done our part. So they have to believe in it.
And what do you do when the biggest gap between the desired reality and reality is not necessarily you, it's the budget?
Yeah, we would just try and address it and talk about it and go, okay, I think for us to get there, we need to be at a point where we can afford this. And so what's the first step in that? And whether they go away and come back, or whether there's other workshops and things that we can do in the beginning to help prop them up so that they can drive some revenue to then come back and do that project.
And what about when the worst happens and they say we're not budging on the budget? How do you tell them that you need to budge on the vision?
I'll probably just do it and drop my fee and then complain about it for years. No, I think you'd hopefully walk away and you'd go, great, I don't think I'm the right person for this. And I remember watching some content from Chris Do. He's an online marketing manager for a company in LA called Blind. And in the last 10 years, he's become really prolific on YouTube, essentially as a coach. And he's done a few workshops on helping graphic designers go from charging $500 for a logo to $10,000 for a logo, just in this exercise and shifting this narrative and talking about value and selling value, not selling an hourly rate. And I love that. And I think it's definitely helped me transform the way that I price projects. But there is that point where you just go, okay, we're not the right fit. Yes, if you're fixed on your budget, fixed on your time, then I'm either going to introduce you to another studio that might be more interested in this work, and I'm not going to be rude. I'm just going to do just a little bit and then let you go on your path. Take that off ramp and you go on your own journey.
Leave them with a sweet taste in their mouth, not a bitter one.
Absolutely, because that's that word of mouth marketing that it'll come back around, and it might be 4 years later that company's pivoted and transformed and they're ready to work with you again.
We often talk about culture here. What would you say is the weaknesses from what you've seen so far of the Australian design culture, especially being isolated in Canberra and looking out in the world? But also, what would its strengths be?
The strengths are in the community of people that I feel rally together and try to support each other. Again, I work with so many amazing manufacturers and different brands that pay salaries to people here in this country. And we've gone through a really challenging couple of years. Some businesses have done really well and others have struggled and even closed. And we all feel it because we have a connection, I think, with these people. And I love that. I love the Australian design community. What I wish I would see a little bit more is just this transparency. Some of my biggest leaps in my career have come from when other people have opened up a little bit and given me some advice and shared something. And I think that's really valuable to pass it and pay it forward.
It's been suggested that grad roles and similar entry-level roles should be reserved for people in the areas where these roles are advertised. What are your thoughts on outsourcing entry-level roles to people from outside the country and outside that community?
Yeah, cool question. What kind of brought on asking this question? Where do you think it came from?
It's this change in expectations and change in the world that a lot of these entry-level roles can be outsourced very easily now in design and in all industries.
We've definitely seen in manufacturing how there's been an outsourcing and a Dutch disease, a wasting of those industrial skills. And it's starting to trickle into other industries as well.
Yeah.
Where there's this race to the bottom on price. The price of labor in certain fields has resulted in diminished development in the long run for certain industries. And it's definitely something that I've seen starting to trickle into design.
Yeah.
It's a really cool question, Ollie, and one that I'm definitely reflecting on at the moment. Through the pandemic, I started exploring building different teams outside of Canberra. And it's because it allowed me, through the process of working from home and pivoting to delivering critiques and feedback and prototyping out of our bedroom, I realized that my team aren't limited to the ACT or Sydney, Melbourne, or even Australia. So I started to really actively look at different creatives that I could collaborate with, firstly on a contract basis to begin with, and then more regularly as a formal employee. And it was a really cool experience because I could open up into a different talent pool And when I talk about silos, I could get very specific on a person that is really good at a detailed area of a project. Yeah, and if I'm offering a multidisciplinary studio and I'm growing and still finding my feet, having access to those particular people has been really beneficial. But the flip side of that, though, is you can tease out then, if you're hiring into this open market, you also start to look at the hourly rate and the lens of that, the capabilities and their experience. And quite quickly, I could see myself shifting over to certain parts of the world and certain places and people, whereas normally I would just find a grad here in Canberra and find a way to get their salary, hire well, and then try and train them up as quickly as I can to get them some results out of them. So I do worry that in time, if I keep building this model and finding these specialists, and some of them I pay an incredible rate, a really good rate, but they're so good at their job and it's amazing to watch them work. I wonder if that means that I'm just not going to hire anyone out of Canberra anymore.
Is that something that you plan on countering in the future, or is it just it's an ever burdensome worry that in the back of your mind?
Yeah, it's a big worry because that's how I got my start. And I feel like you learn through experience. You learn through that first year on the job of just being in a studio. So the goal is to break into a space and be valuable. And a lot of the early career people that I talk to is you need to still form a connection with these studio heads and find a way to fit into their team and show value. And in the beginning, it's not going to be in the ways that you think because you're not a good designer yet. You'll get there, but you just need to get into an organization somehow. And the way that I would do it, it's very different now. I think that's the challenge for this new generation of designers is how do you market yourself and contribute to a team?
Do you ever worry about, my analogy is going to be very crude now, but the boomers, for example, bought into the housing market and then pulled the ladder up behind them. I do sometimes feel like we have a moral obligation to keep these sort of entry-level roles open with very strict requirements in order to keep that ladder down.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think it's these sort of hard conversations and actually peering beneath some of these studios and go, how have you structured your organization? And reflecting on the last few years of sort of this open source market and putting that ladder back down. Also pushing organizations like the Design Institute of Australia to then, identify this as an issue and see how they can actively support it.
And do you also feel that there's also a sense of responsibility to the community, to the culture, to keep that door open?
Definitely. I love that this door is bigger now and I can influence and support people all around the world. And I've got an amazing hire at the moment in the Philippines, an incredible staff member, 3 years now we've been working together, and a great rate, really good output of work. And I know their family. She's a really amazing talent. I never would have met this person if I stuck through this lens of just hiring the way that I did 5 years ago. But I am very aware of people, place, and I love our local community.
Yeah, I can definitely see that shine through. It was a really great answer, detailed, really intriguing. Can you tell us about some specific projects and issues you had within them where you were really pulling your hair out or there was a bit of despair and issues and what that was like and how you got through it?
I see where this question's going, Ollie. We want to talk about failure, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
That's it.
Yeah, the meaty part. I'm quite a transparent person, and I think if you just came and talked to me normally, I try to share these sort of experiences. I think it's quite healthy, and this process of learning how to run a company and be a good designer is through failure, and it's about the practice. I think you need to think of it about practice. The only way to get really good at soccer or baking cakes is just by getting reps in and doing it. And so I've had some shockers, as I'm sure you can imagine, and some of them relate to profit. Others are just stressful, just experiences. One of my most successful kind of projects or celebrated projects personally is my Hup folding chair. And it's not for a brand, it's a self-directed design exercise. At that time, I was trying to set one brief a year that was just for me to explore and to level up and use that as a bit of a marketing tool. And I was lucky enough to get that chair over to Milan and then took it over to ICFF in New York. But the whole process was a disaster. The chair never really worked. It was a folding chair. It was engineered by me, funded by me. And when I shipped it to New York, because again, packed it into my luggage, I put the hinges into one crate and then the chair into another, and packed 3 chairs to go to ICFF for a stand that I had there, and landed, and they'd lost one of the crates. And I was at Home Depot. I probably had $200 for the whole trip. I was staying with a friend. It turns out I couldn't get onto that friend and ended up sleeping on the street. It's this amazing comedy of errors that snowballed, but I ended up making new hinges from piano hinges from Home Depot and cut them in the store with the saw there. They couldn't even buy the saw. Glued this chair together and hung it on the wall so you couldn't even sit on it. And the other one didn't fold. And I presented it. All these people came past, and it felt like at the time a disaster. But there were so many moments in that just showed, I think, just the way that I would think and solve problems and didn't give up in that moment. And I had a lot of opportunities, I think, to potentially sell that chair at that stand that never converted, because the people who were looking to invest in a product like that could see through the bullshit that this is a cool idea, but this product clearly doesn't work. That's a failure story on a macro level for sure, or for a project.
And what was the lesson learned?
To always just find a way through it. I think I could have not exhibited. I could have told the people, hey, I don't have a product, can I get a refund? But that was never an option. And a really cool takeaway from it is I called back home to Inklab, who was a graphic design studio. At the time, we were exploring doing a bit of a rebrand and a website for me, but nothing had really happened yet. And I told them this scenario. I was like, guys, I've got this opportunity in New York, but I've got no product to show. And within 24 hours, they just rallied and built me this awesome catalog of some of the images that I had of the chair. They found a printer in Brooklyn, a newspaper printer. And then I sent them these files, and I walked to Brooklyn from Manhattan. This is just how tired and green, stressed I was, and went to this printer, and he'd printed 250 of these newspapers for me. And I took them back to the stand, and people loved them. It was a really awesome tactile marketing touch point that looked really considered and very premium, almost better than the chair itself, right?
Yeah.
That wouldn't have happened if I wasn't backed into a corner and didn't ask, get a bit vulnerable and call your friends for help.
That was your guerrilla marketing moment.
Yeah, and just leaning on your favors, this whole community around us, right? You got to ask people for help, and I'm a big believer in that. You just reach out. This is Tom Skeehan, and you're listening to Redacted.
Hey everyone, this episode sponsored by PCBWay, the go-to destination for printed circuit board prototyping, low-volume production, and PCB assembly. If your team is working on electronics and you're in need of a prototype PCB, I can't recommend PCBWay enough. You can get a quote instantly, even if your circuit board schematics aren't finished yet. They can also help you with injection molded, 3D printed, sheet metal, and vacuum cast prototypes. PCBWay is the circuit board prototyper of choice for companies like Samsung, Siemens, Honeywell, Tesla, and Apple. But you don't have to be a big company to use their services. I've personally used their services to instantly get quotes and have had prototype PCBs delivered in a timely manner. On top of all of that, PCBWay is offering us a special discount just for our listeners. When you get a quote from PCBWay, be sure to use our promo code REDACTED for a special discount on us. You can find PCBWay in our episode description or go to pcbway.com.
Redacted.
There are a lot of design consultancies that never really reach their potential. What do you think is holding them back?
Maybe not focusing enough. That's my biggest fear at the moment, is I've got all these opportunities to do projects, seems like around the world with amazing companies and brands, but they're starting to fracture out into different sectors and can almost become their own business in itself.
Yeah.
And that's a bit scary because there's only so much that I can manage at the moment as I'm learning. And I think where I'm at now and where my limit is a lot higher than it used to be. And I'm quite proud of the journey that I'm on. But being able to focus on the one pillar or the area that you're deeply passionate about or that fits your goals, I think that's the test of someone who can really scale a studio.
that story had everything in it. It was really...
What was the process of cutting piano hinges in Home Depot? Did you just walk up and turn on the machine, or did you ask for permission?
Oh, it was a hand hacksaw. I got a hacksaw off the shelf, unwrapped it because it has this cardboard over the blade, and then stood there. And I think I even borrowed a tape measure and then measured and then cut them, and then went up to the counter and bought the hinges. And glue and screwdrivers and there's lots of story. If you talk to, again, this is about sharing through failure.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
That's a pretty light story. It's a bit of a fun one where pretty low risk, and again, it was just more of a marketing exercise and you just find a way through it. I've shown now in Milan and London and even quite a lot in Australia, this happens every single time. There's always something like this in the process. It's those people I think that can enjoy that or just see that's part of the journey. And then adapt and just keep going and not give up and look to the better version of yourself.
Water off a duck's back.
You have to, right? That's about being a creative. Just let it go, move on and level up.
Yeah, find a way through and then skill up. Yeah, for sure.
Look at you guys in this podcast. It's incredible. It's such a beautifully produced thing that just takes so much energy and time. And imagine where you were. It's an epic amount of growth in a short amount of time.
You can ask us questions.
Yeah. Look, I'm pretty good. I'm super curious to find out more about you guys, and this podcast is great and definitely a market for it. So, yeah, I appreciate being invited. It's an awesome opportunity.
Oh, I thought he was going to ask us about our spirit animal.
I would like to know if you're gonna pull that segment and you can't leave me hanging, Fraser. What is your spirit animal?
So for years, I used to answer this question with owl. Because I was like, I aspire to be wise, like the goddess Athena. This came up at a party, and a mate of mine just turned and goes, oh, no, I don't think so. And I was like, what do you want about it? You worm your way into things, and you make things work, and everyone wants you to just find the cheese for them. And I was like, I don't understand where this is going. You have this unnerving ability to turn a no into a yes. Oh, this is why that guy won't let me in the room. Yeah, because he knows that he can't disagree with you. I was like, okay, where's this going? You're some sort of vermin, a rat, or a fox. And I'm like, I'm going to go with the fox.
Foxes are sexy.
Yeah, until you touch one, and then they smell bad.
They are.
It's absolutely foul.
Yeah, I like that you find the cheese. That's cool. I'll take that.
Yeah.
What about you, Ollie?
I haven't thought about this that much, but I'm feeling I'm either a lion or a dolphin because I'm quite easygoing and I aspire to be strong.
No, I don't think so.
You don't think so?
I was thinking more like a golden retriever.
That's a good
dog. But I like,
if Will's laughing, that means it's on the money.
The dolphin.
I don't know. Dolphins are evil.
No, they just floric around.
No. If they were so smart, why don't they build boats?
They're very smart, and I feel like they're more creative and free. I'm not sure though, but I really like the lion analogy because, like a leader as well, which I aspire to be, in general.
Nice.
And
I can get my head around that.
Yeah. So you said golden retriever because I'm friendly. Firstly,
we'll go with that.
What did you say?
Bounding and full of energy.
Yeah.
That's good.
That's good.
I like to hibernate.
But I can still disagree with you, even though you get yeses. So you can still,
true.
Which is important.
You can tell me with strong amounts of evidence that there is no squirrel.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Tom, for joining us on the show today. We had a great time chatting to you, and it felt like a really down-to-earth chat, and our listeners are really going to love this podcast, I hope. And yeah, wishing you all a really good year this year with your new ventures in your studio.
Cheers, guys. Really appreciate the opportunity, and you're doing some awesome work. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And for our listeners, don't forget to check out the show notes for links to anything we've mentioned, where to follow the show, see Tom's work, plus the discounts from our sponsor, PCBWay. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, this has been Redacted.
The number you have dialed has not been recognized. Please check and try again. The number you have dialed has been
redacted.